Well, good morning. Welcome to ACT via Zoom, March 27th, number 13 for 2023. And thank you so much for being here this morning, whether you're coming in as yourself or Carol Sullivan or whoever you're here. So, and I am the real Carol Sullivan, the facilitator with Cindy Madigan as the co-host. You can rename yourself as yourself, and then you could also put in your city, your county, or your league, because it's really nice to see where people are coming from. And you can add your Indigenous lands information in chat so that we are reminded of and can honor those whose lands we now live, work, and play on. So again, this morning in the reminder chat, in the reminder email, there was a recording for the tree campaign and Be Bold redistricting. You can click on those links and it should take you directly to those two sessions of ACT via Zoom. Next week, our speaker is Betty Carteret, who's director of Citizens Climate Lobby for Skagit County. And she lives in Anacortes, by the way. Last year, she was the one who brought us climate pricing basics. And next week, she's going to delve into the federal Inflation Reduction Act to see what it holds for all of us, with a focus on how we can participate in solutions to climate change. And tomorrow, Betty hosts a program as part of the Citizens Climate Lobby. It's part 3 of the Clean Energy Future series. The flyer and the link are in the reminder email. And I really highly recommend these series. It will be especially relevant tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. when the topic is Electrify Our Homes. Then the following month, on the last Tuesday of April, electrifying everything we ride or drive in. I think it's well worth the time to watch. One other thing that did not get put in the league's newsletter, because they added a committee hearing too late for me to get it in. It might have also been because I was being grandma this weekend too. But anyway, there is an opportunity to sign in pro for Senate Bill 5208. It arrived too late for the newsletter, but it's not too late for us to sign in pro because the committee hearing and appropriations isn't until Thursday. And I think I asked Cindy, did you get that email? And she's going to put a link in the chat that will lead you directly to do that action, sign in pro. This is a bill that's going to help update online voter registration by making it easier for people, young people especially, who like to do things online. They will only need to provide the last 4 digits of their social security number for ID. Also, the younger people who don't always have a driver's license, who don't always have passport, they don't have other identifying information that says, that they are a citizen. So this will help. Okay, so let's see. I think we're up to today. And turning to today, I'm so pleased to be introducing Cynthia Stewart. She is a very important member of the League of Women Voters of Washington advocacy team because she's issue chair for transportation, revenue, growth management, and housing and homelessness. For decades, she worked in the field of public works, including management roles on the King County Council Central Staff, King County Solid Waste Division, King County Airport, where she was designated at one point Airport Manager of the Year by the Washington State Department of Transportation. She knows what she's talking about in that area. She's also consulted with small cities on development of capital facilities plans and has served as the Deputy County Manager in Thurston County, where she was responsible for finance, including funding of the capital facilities plan. And after she retired, she didn't give up. She became a very active League of Women Voters member and has served on the advocacy team for several years. I'm not exactly sure what Cynthia is going to be sharing with us today, but when Cynthia talks, listen. She has a lot of information that she will share with us. Cynthia, I know I'm giving you high praise. I've set a high bar for you, but you will not disappoint. What you have is
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. You did set a too high of a bar. So thank you very much for that. It was very complimentary and I appreciate it. So I will share my screen. You asked me to talk about homelessness and housing. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So hopefully it's not stuff that all of you already know. And let me just get this to the slideshow and I can move forward here. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about what I said last year that I'm not going to elaborate on this year, and then some new information. And so just to start, I want to reiterate how last year I talked extensively about how the data is inconsistent and missing, and we recognize that homelessness is a national, regional, and a local crisis when we have more than 500,000 people who are homeless in the country, many of them with children. And so what I want to say is that last year I also talked about a number of people in the state of Washington, and this is from point in time data, which has to do with 1 day a year that the people who are homeless in the state, well, actually all across the country, are counted, and it is not reflective of the total big picture. So the reason I'm bringing these two numbers up from last year is that it hasn't changed at all. This is a 2022 report, and what the report actually says is that we haven't done point in time count since 2020. So we don't have any current numbers about how many people are actually experiencing homelessness in the state of Washington or in most counties. So what we see here is that overall, they're still attributing homelessness to about 600,000 people in the country. 2/3 of those are individuals, about 1/3 are people in families, about 1/6 are chronically homeless individuals. And so this is a big problem, and my guess is it's quite a bit bigger than this. So again, the Department of Commerce is using the same exact number, and if you go to their website, what you see is 2021 report pending, 2022 report pending. We don't have any new information, and it's kind of frustrating. So I also talked last year about how between 10 and 40% of college students are homeless, and this is not typically necessarily counted in the point in time counts. These are people who are couch surfing, moving from place to place. They're sleeping in their cars or whatever, and they're not necessarily visible. The numbers in the homeless students are going up. I've talked to several people affiliated with universities in the last few months, and they're reporting 40% fairly consistently, whether it's UW-Tacoma or whether it's community college or even UW-Seattle. So this is shocking when you think about how much we need our students to be educated for the future. And so last year, I went through some great detail about why we should care. And this year, I'm not going to do that because I think everybody finally recognizes that it is a crisis, but also what the solution is, which is it's housing. So just to elaborate, though, on the number problem, what we have in Washington State is over 1.6 million people who are receiving public assistance. Those are the people who are most vulnerable to becoming homeless. And of them, they have reported through the combined data of not just the homelessness management information system, but also Medicaid and the state systems, that 171,000 people in Washington have reported being homeless or are unstably housed, meaning they feel at risk or they are temporarily sheltered in some housing, but maybe won't be able to stay there. So these numbers are inconsistent again, unpredictable, and larger than we are used to thinking about. So Department of Commerce has identified housing need, National Low Income Housing Coalition has posted housing needs by state. And so what they've identified is 243,000 really renter households that are extremely low income. Now, those are, again, people that are most at risk of becoming homeless. And if you go to the lower right box, 75% of those people are experiencing severe cost burden, which is exacerbating their risk. And cost burden means they're paying more than 30% of their income for housing. And in severe cost burden means they're paying more than 50% of their income for housing. And when you figure they also need food, they also need transportation, they need clothing, they need all kinds of other things, that is just really hard to get by, hard to live with. So another dimension of this is in the middle of the top bar, 145,000 units short of rental homes that are affordable and available for extremely low income renters. Now, the Department of Commerce has typically used a number of about 250,000 shortfall in affordable housing, but this number is specifically extremely low income, which means that there's actually a much greater shortage than this. They've also noted that statewide, $30,900 is the maximum income for extremely low income household. That's not very much money, and $65,000 annual income is necessary to afford a 2-bedroom rental home at fair market rent in the state of Washington. Now, this is obviously an average, and some of you, I have talked with you at your counties, and those numbers vary considerably, but average across the state. So when you have somebody making 30,000 and they need to have 65,000 and they've got a family, it's a problem. This is from the department. No, this is from, oh gosh, I've lost track of it. I'm sorry, I think the next slide will show where this is from, but basically, I think it's from the same source as the last one, the National Low Income Housing Alliance. And Washington has moved from number 7 status to number 6 in terms of the most expensive place to live. This is data that you probably may have some trouble reading, but it again points out the disparity between what people are making and what they have to have in order to afford housing. And so somebody working at minimum wage, it takes them 72 hours a week to get a 1-bedroom rental home at fair market rent. This is, again, a statewide average. And this is even worse in some of the more expensive counties than it is in some of the others. So fair market rent has been averaged by this organization at $1,300 a month for 1-bedroom and $1,600 for a 2-bedroom home. And a household at 50% of area median income is only making $1,300 a month. So this is a problem. And again, this is what I referred to that I shared last year. We were number 7, and we have gotten worse in Washington state. Now, racial disparities are really particularly problematic because I think most of you being league members, you're aware that the racial disparities are prevalent in all dimensions of our society. And so these graphs basically show, I'm having trouble. I've got to see if I can move some stuff here. I can't see it myself. So household wealth by weight, by race is the top left-hand diagram, and you can see that the mean is, if you add all the income together and divide it by the number of people, that's the mean. It's for white people, it's very high. It's about $950,000, excuse me. where for non-white, for Black, it's only 139,000, and for Hispanic, it's 192,000. But the median, which is halfway between the top and the bottom, is quite a bit lower. So for white people, it's 181,000, but for Black, it's only 20,000. And so that's the number at which there are as many people below that number as are above that number, but that's very telling in terms of the difference between the races. And so the mean, the other one shows what the mean is. Again, that's the number which, if you take all of it and divide it by the number of people, that's the number you get. So if you look at the top on the right hand side, 90 to 100 percentile of income, what you see is, again, the white people, is the blue bar, are making so much more than Hispanics, which is gray, and African Americans, which is brown. Now, if you go down to the left, to the lowest percentile of income, you see that blue bar is still way ahead of the other racial groups. And so it's really important to be aware of this. If you look at the very bottom, 0 to 20 and 20 to 40, the income is so bad that is why we have so many people disproportionately homeless who are, now I can't find my screen moving here. And so this is another way of portraying that the homeless population is in the top bar. And you will see there that relative to the US population down below, the next bar down, the black bar of homeless is way disproportionate to the black bar in the US population. And the white bar at the top is lower than the white bar, the gray bar, I should say, in the second range. And so one of the things that I've gotten tripped up on is talking about racial differences using numbers. And what I always mean to say is that proportionate to the share of income, the lowest income people pay a greater share of their income or share of their wealth than the people at the highest income. And that is, Black people pay disproportionately higher rates of their income than people who are white. Now, the reason that comes up is I've been told that I've sometimes slipped up and used gross numbers, which means that obviously white people are going to pay in gross terms more of the tax that we get collected. But in terms of their share, it's disproportionate. So you probably don't make that mistake, but just in case you hear me do it, I want you to know I know the difference, and I'm hoping that you won't be making the same mistake I've been doing. So what we know is the solution is affordable housing, and that we have to have funding. We have to construct new units, given the shortage of units that we have. We need to zone differently, and we need to provide financial support to people who don't have enough money to obtain housing at market rates. And so again, in the little box on the right, just reiterates that affordable means 30% of your income goes to housing. And of course, if you're making not much money, it's way more than that. And so it's not affordable. People at the highest income level have no problem achieving housing that's affordable. So what this is, it's a diagram of the theme of this year, which is missing middle housing. And so what's important about this is that in order to solve the housing problem, we don't just need more units in general. We need more of a wide range of units. And I'll be talking about comp planning in a few minutes. And the comp planning requirement now is that the comp plans include all of this that you see here, which is very dense down to single family, market rate down to low income affordability, and including shelters and transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing is a particular issue because it's the most expensive kind to provide, and the people living in it cannot pay anywhere near the cost of it. Permanent supportive housing is housing that is paired with basically case management and necessary services tailored to the individual in order to allow them to live as independently as possible, given the current problems that they have. And oftentimes the most chronically homeless people fall into that category. And while there's been a move to increase the volume or the capacity of permanent supportive housing, we are far from what we need. And so the new comp plan requirement is to cover all of this, and that's going to be interesting. So the second underlying need, in addition to housing capacity, is for support services. And there is clearly a lack of sufficient treatment available for mental health and substance abuse. And when I talk about legislation, I'm not going to focus on this as much, but I do want to make the point that behavioral health has been a big focus of the legislature this year. The legislature came with basically a couple of main priorities. One of them was housing, and another one is behavioral health. Part of that is because of the people who are homeless and low income, basically, who need behavioral health support in some form. And I think they're assuming that most of the chronically homeless people have behavioral health issues and substance abuse, but also because the COVID experience has increased the number of people who are suicidal and the number of people who need mental health or behavioral health support. So the COVID experience has really exacerbated the need for an already underfunded set of services. In addition to that, health services, behavioral health services, homeless agencies are all, and now I think we're moving towards education, they're all short on staff. And so part of what has to happen to beef up the service delivery is also to find ways to get more people into those careers now, and also to jack up the wages so that people will stay there. So we have both an education problem and a retention problem. So I think I've already talked about the bottom bullet about the permanent supportive housing and the need for treatment and case management for many of them. So last year, I spent a lot of time developing the reasons why we need to pay attention. I'm just going to move right into the legislation just to kind of show you where we've been. So funding is one of the biggest problems. And so this diagram basically portrays that a lot of money has been put in annually into the Housing Trust Fund. Now, in 2020, that was the second year of a biennium. So that adding $325 million to the Housing Trust Fund or to other funds for construction of new housing was huge in terms of very unusual for a supplemental budget year. 2021 was the beginning of the second biennium that I've been working on this. And so between 21 and 22, we had even more money than that if you add up all those numbers, put into funds and from which construction can be accomplished. And those monies go out to private nonprofits in terms of grants and low interest loans. So there is a lot more money available. And this year, I think it's going to be even more. So we haven't we're right smack in the beginning and the middle of the budget process, so we don't really know how it's going to turn out. But the proposal is for a minimum of $400 million to go into the Housing Trust Fund plus more. So then we need funding for social services and financial support. And so this matrix basically shows you that started out in 2020 with a little bit of rental assistance and then went way up in terms of rental assistance. Now, a lot of that was federal money. So what we're going to see is a drop off in the rental assistance, even though people still need it. And then $187 million in 2021 for foreclosure prevention. A lot of people during COVID who lost their jobs could not pay their mortgages. And so if we didn't support those people during that period of time, we would have had even more homelessness. And then the housing and essential needs, which is called the HIN program, was increased by a significant amount. In 22, a new program was added, Apple Health and Homes. And what that program is, the bill says you can't have somebody in the hospital and then release them to homelessness. They have to have a place to go, which is a very good policy, but it's also quite expensive, especially given the lack of affordable housing. So some money was put into that to get it started. And then, as you can see, the increased aged, blind, and disabled cash grants were only $197 a month. And what that is, it's money that they can use for their own personal needs above and beyond whatever kind of Social Security or other Medicaid or Medicare or other kind of support that they get. They needed money in their pocket to pay for clothing, pay for, somebody keeps quoting birthday presents for their grandkids, whatever it is. So that it will help a lot of people. And then $45 million for transitioning. And what that will do is that'll provide support for housing where people go temporarily in between a shelter and a permanent housing situation. So what I'm hoping you can see is what the trend line here has been since this got noticed as a big crisis. Then we have a funding available through state and local tax changes. So a lot of work was done in 2020, and you're not seeing quite as much going on now because the lag time between establishing a new tax or a change in the tax, so an exemption might be a change in the tax, the length of time between starting that, collecting the money, and using it is huge. So in 2020, a bill was passed allowing a certain share of the state sales tax to be kept, retained by the local governments for housing purposes. An excess levy was allowed, and some counties have used that, some cities have used that. Property tax exemption for seniors and veterans was changed so that the threshold for the exemption varies with locale rather than being a flat number across the state. And that accommodates people, for example, in King County, where the cost of living is so much higher relative to someplace like Walla Walla or even Okanagan. So that adjustment should have helped a lot of people keep their houses. And then property tax exemptions for affordable housing providers and so forth. And one of the big ones was changing the local 0.1% sales tax, which had been on the books for quite a while, from requiring voter approval to allowing it to be approved by councilmanic vote. And that actually has opened that tax up. And right now, I think there's 31 jurisdictions that have passed it. And I'm happy to say that finally Pierce County did last week. So they make 32. So the real estate excise tax, that's a tax that is paid on the sale of a property. And so the nexus between REIT and housing is significant because the more that housing sales occur, the more that real estate excise tax gets paid. Now, this is a trauma this year because with the housing prices going up and the shift in buyer patterns, the REIT has gone down. So local governments are concerned now that some of the programs, REIT is used for 3 different kinds of functions. One of them is for infrastructure broadly, one of them is for parks, and one of them is now for housing. That was added a couple of years ago. So with that going down, it's making local governments very concerned. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor the rest of this, but I'm going to go on. There also has been money allocated for permanent supportive housing, and that's super important. So I'm going to go on to other categories. So in the land use category, density has been a big issue, and that remains a big issue. So the numbers there are bill numbers from those years. So bonuses, authorization, and incentives for increased density have all been things that started back in 2020. What's happening now in 23 is the density is not happening in many jurisdictions, and so the legislature is looking at enforcing it, and that's the primary focus of the land use issues this year in the Growth Management Act. So forcing the issue of transit-oriented development, forcing the issue of single-family neighborhoods having to increase their density. That's this year, but it started back in 2020. Housing action plans, which are the precursor to the comp plan changes that will be coming up, grants were given to a number, I think about 8 different jurisdictions back in 2020 for getting that started. And then tiny house communities were authorized back in 2020. Now, again, all of these things, once they're passed and they're authorized, it still takes years for them to happen. Even tiny houses are, it takes several years to get them online. You can build one fast, but you can't necessarily get the property for multiple units. You can't necessarily get the permits and all that. So it takes a while to make this stuff happen. And then tenant and homeowner protections have been a big theme also over the years, and again, more in 2020 than now. So protection of people who have manufactured or mobile homes. The big issue there, as many of you I'm sure know, is that landowners own the property, and then the manufactured or mobile homes that sit on top of it are owned by the resident. And so with the surge in land prices and the opportunity and the need to build more units and that kind of thing, there's been a lot of pressure on those places to convert them into more dense properties. And so the residents, who tend to be very low income, had to be protected. And so that's been happening. And then various provisions for changing either notices of rent increases or a grace period or a payment plan or any of that. A whole variety of bills were passed in order to take some of the pressure off tenants who didn't have any money and who were losing their jobs, particularly in COVID. And then evictions had been a matter of a process in state law that could not be deviated from. And so this 5600 changed that process so that judges could actually mitigate some of the problems that that homeowners had. If they couldn't pay their mortgage or whatever, they could work something out. And they also at that time set up a what do I say, mediation program, so people could have access to mediation between them and their landlords. And I think the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. Legal aid was added in last year, so that people getting evicted could get counsel. Then we have young people. Young people, it's almost the saddest thing of all to have a lot of young people who are homeless. And the McKinney-Vento program, as most of you know, is the one that federal government requires that schools provide services necessary to keep the kids in school when they're homeless. So the funding for that was expanded in 2020. And additionally, given the situation with college homeless people, Pilot programs were started and then expanded again last year so that more schools were using their facilities for support services, everything short of housing for any student who is homeless. And then changing the eligibility for different programs to a higher age was helpful. And then the interesting one in 22 is in the lower right-hand corner. The whole issue of informed consent for a variety of purposes. Often homeless students had no way of getting their parents and they had no guardians oftentimes. So there was no way to for them to be able to get adults to sign for them if they needed informed consent. So this is a bill that allowed unaccompanied homeless minors to execute their own informed consent, which is kind of interesting. So where we are now, we have 4 weeks to go. I'm going to check my time here. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through all the bills here because it's a moving target, first of all, and there are themes. So there's a lot of work going on with landlord tenant and home ownership. The one that I want to call attention to that I think is really special this year is the bill that, if passed, would basically help to fund down payments by African Americans whose families were affected by redlining back in the pre-60s, in the 60s and prior. And so some documentation is necessary there, but the testimony on that is that it would be extremely helpful in remediating some of the damage that's been done over the years for African American families. There's a variety of other stuff that doesn't fit into a theme there. The land use and density related bills that are likely to survive all this, and there could be more, but right now I'm looking at 4 most likely. They're all related to changing the nature of single family neighborhoods, requiring ADUs at a minimum, and transit oriented development. Transit oriented development means that, or the way the bill is structured is that anything within a half a mile of a certain kind of a mass transit facility, whether it's light rail or whether it's bus, having to do with a station or something like that, would be mandated to have a certain amount of multifamily units permitted, and then others higher capacity residential allowed, and according to the jurisdiction. These bills, several of them actually, they started out defining transit as something a lot broader. So something like within a stop, within a half a mile of a stop on a high, what do you call that? I don't want to say high speed. The rapid transit, that's what I want to say. So in Seattle, for example, there's a number of lines that are called rapid transit, and that means that they go farther between stops and they go faster to get to where they're going. That was taken out. And so now what they're looking at is major park and ride lots or major transit centers as the places where this would happen. So, but the ADUs and the other options for increasing the density in single family neighborhoods are still out there. In terms of financing, just a whole bunch of stuff, but primarily the big ticket numbers are in the Housing Trust Fund and in the housing category in the capital budget. So commerce assistance, I want to call attention to that because as we go into the planning process for comp plans, Commerce has been required by several bills, and including one coming up, to provide technical assistance to local jurisdictions in their planning processes. And they've already started that. So that's going to be really helpful in getting through this. And then I also wanted just to call attention to behavioral health support. So adding things like 24-hour drop-in centers. The bill is called 23-hour drop-in centers because they can't allow people to stay 24 full hours. So 23 hours and 59 minutes is the length of time, but people don't have to have an appointment. They can drop in and get help. But there's a lot of other funding in there for behavioral health that is currently contemplated. So I want to go on to say that a lot of jurisdictions are not planning well. This is an example of a single family neighborhood, obviously, but the more we have these, the more we have sprawl. And the impact of not, and we don't have, these are the neighborhoods where nobody wants a shelter. Nobody wants permanent supportive housing. Nobody wants any kind of multifamily. And many of them are opposing ADUs as well. And so the impacts of not planning are pretty significant in terms of not getting where we need to go over the long term. And even as I mentioned earlier, whether a bill is passed or policies change or funding is offered, it still takes multiple years before something actually happens. So it's important to recognize that. And I actually meant to put in the chat, and I will when I get done, a copy of this so you can have it. But HUD requirements, I don't think I need to belabor that, but there's supposed to be a homelessness planning process in every county. And Snohomish, King, Pierce, Chelan, and Clark have their own planning entities, and all the rest are done by the Department of Commerce. And I think that's all I need to say about that. Now, this doesn't deal with the housing, this just deals with homeless services. There are a lot of misconceptions, and I'm urging local leagues to get out there and help change the messaging. I'm not going to belabor that either, because I think we're running short on time if we're going to have any kind of questions and answers or discussion, but you can see that later, more misconceptions. So what most jurisdictions need to do now is to figure out how they're going to develop their housing over the next 20 years, how they're going to deal with homelessness in the next 5 years, how they're going to site the facilities that are needed, and how they're going to pay for it. And this evening at our housing affinity group, I'm going to talk about how the elements work together in the comp plan. So Department of Commerce has come up with numbers already for people to consider. And these links at the bottom of this page, so when you get it, you can check them. The links are to the projections by county. But statewide, what they're saying is we need 122,500 permanent supportive housing units. And we need 220,500 supported housing for 0 to 30% AMI on top of the 122. And then when you get up to the middle, people at 50 to 80% AMI, or between 80 and 120% area median income, another 200 and some thousand. And then over 120 AMI, we need 311,000 more units. Now, this is for 20 years. So this isn't something that people have to get done today, or even assume that even in the next 10 years. But what the law says now is that every county has, and every jurisdiction doing comp planning has to have in its final plan how they are going to do this, how they are going to get all of these 20-year forecasts covered in these categories. So it's an important thing for the league to know and be engaged in. And then in addition to that, is this points out another 91,000 emergency housing beds, which is shelter. So how are we going to do this? And at the top, the little images clearly point out that they're expecting to have all of those kinds of things included, multi-family as well as single family. So my pitch to all of you is to get engaged in comprehensive planning in your local jurisdiction. and to the diagram at the top is somebody moving something in and out. Basically, I believe that if the league gets involved in comprehensive planning and gets the planners to agree to do it right, people can actually work on how they want their neighborhood of the future to be. They can talk about how, if they understand the mandate is for the city or the county to absorb X number of people and X types of housing. I believe they can talk together about how close together they want certain areas to be, how tall they want certain buildings to be, how they're going to have trees and open space, how are they going to create walkability and still have the density, how are they going to have services so that if they have people, so that people don't all have to have cars to get to something, and how are they going to provide transit? One of the problems right now is that there's a link to transit of today, but if we expand transit as we should for climate change reasons also, how should that be laid out? Where should that transit go, and how should the housing be linked to that so that it's logical? And then where can shelters go? So if the community understands what they have to do, I believe they can answer some of these questions and design land use plans for their community and zoning for their communities that really make sense for them. So that's what the league can do for the community and for the homeless people. If you can consider shared housing in your own home, if you could support location of safe parking spaces, which is still a big problem, people still don't want those. Advocate for the additional tax reform and the funding that we need. Advocate for land use planning, support shelter programs, and then just smile and be friendly to somebody that you see on the street who's obviously homeless, because they need that support. They need that friendliness. That will make their day. So thank you. I appreciate your listening.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. You've given us a lot to think about. And I have a question about the community engagement that you've just been discussing. Where should we go to find out what our own community is doing? Do we go to this? I mean, this is probably the obvious answer. City councils? I mean, I'm not sure here.
No, I think, hold on a second, just give me 1 second, because
Okay,
I meant to put this document in the chat, and I want to do it before I forget. I'm assuming somebody will want it. I apologize for the delay here. So copy and chat, paste. Okay, that should do it. So what I have is another whole thing for tonight for the affinity group that goes into a little more detail about that question you just asked. I would start with talking to the local planners. So whether you're in Bellingham or Olympia or Tumwater or Seattle or anywhere, Vancouver, the local planners are the ones who are orchestrating all of this. And in some cases, like Bellingham, they're really amenable to getting out and doing it right. That is not typical. That is far from typical. So what you will find when you talk to the planners is that they're a little resistant. And so I would think about it ahead of time, and what would you like them to do? And then talk to them about how you can help them get to where they need to be. That's what I would suggest. So Marcia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One is a logistic one about weighing in on these bills. If I weighed in at an earlier point, should I do it again?
Oh, yes. Every stage needs people to continue their support. So as you know, there's the chamber number 1, whether it's the House or the Senate, you're weighing in there to get it out of there and move to the next stage. Well, then the next stage, it starts all over again. So you have to weigh in there to keep it moving. And then at each phase, so there's a committee hearing, And then it moves to another committee sometimes, like to a finance committee or something like that. You need to weigh in there. And then it goes to the rules committee. And sometimes we ask people to tell the rules committee they want a bill pulled and sent to the floor. Then you need to let your legislators know you want them to vote for it when it's on the floor. So people who are actively advocating, whether they're on the lobby team or not, are weighing in at every single one of those points on in both chambers.
Okay.
There's another.
And then
Oh,
my other question is, in established neighborhoods, I'm for increasing density, but in established neighborhoods, is the infrastructure there? Or is that a problem?
It depends, and that's part of what comp planning has to analyze. Part of the first step in the process is to inventory the housing that's currently available. And then wherever that is the infrastructure sufficient? Does it need remediation? If you're going to add density, does it need something different? But typically the infill is less invasive than sprawl. And the whole point of the Growth Management Act has been to create infill rather than allowing us to go out and take away resource lands. But also that costs more because adding infrastructure is more expensive than incremental change in existing infrastructure. So whether it's utilities like water and sewer and electric, or whether it's roads or sidewalks, it's typically less costly to do it as an infill project than it is to do it outside.
Okay, thank you.
thank you. And there's another question in chat. Are there some places that have solutions to the number of Airbnb type housing that has made a big impact on available housing?
I think the impact hasn't been as big as people assume that it is, but the answer is I haven't heard anything where there's a magic answer. One of the things that the legislature is looking at is putting a tax on that. So that if somebody has short-term rentals, is what they call it. If somebody is operating short-term rentals, that it gets taxed. A bill that I had hoped would really pass that didn't make it even this far is one that would allow Department of Commerce to gather an inventory of rental units of all sorts. And I think the people that opposed it were fearful that it would lead to more taxation. But in reality, what the legislature wanted to find out is how much is really happening and where. So what are the rental units really like? Are the short-term and long-term? And what capacity is there? But that bill did not pass.
Cindy noted that there's a League of Women Voters in Bellingham invited their city and county planning director to present at a Zoom meeting this Thursday. Is that league open to, is that meeting? Well, is that meeting open to other members?
Yes, absolutely. I'll put the link to register if anybody wants to join in and just see how we're doing it. Yeah.
And
I think what they're doing is amazing, and I wish everybody would follow that model.
What is the affinity group you're referring to, Cynthia?
So the affinity group is just any league member or other person who wants to be kind of up to speed on housing issues. And we started meeting several months ago, once a month on the fourth Monday of each month at 6. Is it 6 or 6? Yeah, I think it's 6. Yeah. And if anybody, I guess I could put the link in the chat.
Cindy has already done that.
Oh,
well,
okay.
I
scrolled down.
Okay.
I put your contact information,
Oh,
your Comcast. That way you can get on the list that Cynthia sends out with the link and the agenda. And it's really a great opportunity. Small group. We just discuss what's going on in our areas. And I had asked Cynthia to do the comp plan presentation tonight. So we're really looking forward to that.
And Doris came up with what is really a good idea: shared housing, creative networking to support people renting a room in their home, amending a home to create a room accessible for another housemate. So much housing in private homes that is sitting empty. You don't need to rent to a homeless or an unknown person. but you bring someone into your home that you simply can help. And I found myself doing that, and I didn't realize at first that was what I was doing. I thought I was helping myself by providing myself with a live-in cat sitter for when I traveled, which was frequent in that point in time. But what I've ended up realizing is I was providing a house for someone who could not afford on their own to have a decent apartment. Anyway,
So I'd like to just add to that, that there are several areas in the state where there are agencies, and in fact, more and more, where there are agencies who will help you find somebody and do matchmaking so that you don't end up with somebody you're incompatible with. They also will help set up a rental agreement so that it's appropriate for both parties. And then they will help you mediate if there's a problem, or change the living arrangements if necessary. So look for shared housing by Google in your community, and you may find an agency that can help with that.
Doris, do you want to
Yeah.
ask your next question?
Well, that actually
go
wasn't
ahead.
my next, that wasn't my next question. I don't know who put that in. Well, I was just gonna say, we don't really have a hoarded housing shortage as much as we have a sharing shortage. If you think of all the people whose, kids are gone and now they have a 4-bedroom house and they have 3 empty bedrooms, it's just a matter of fear and networking to bring that into the, 21st century and help people, as we're saying, the shared housing, to use some of that housing to their benefit as well as the benefit of the person. And I've done that for many, many years in Mount Vernon and made really great friends. And I just think the fear factor, like something might happen, or, people will steal from me, or there's just so much going on that some kind of facilitation like you're talking about would help to use those bedrooms that are sitting there right now, costing the person money to keep up and pay taxes on, that aren't housing anybody.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch slightly to another thing that I was thinking of while you were talking, Cynthia, the rethink that I think about so much as in terms of recycling and whatnot. But I was riding with someone the other day, and we noticed that there was construction, and it was something to do with transit, and it was taking away, the other person said, "Oh dear, look, they're taking away all the parking spaces." And then we thought, but they are providing transit so that people do not need cars to park. So, I mean, it's a rethink thing too, because when you first see it, you may see it as a negative, but when you think again, it's a positive.
Well, one of the big issues right now in the legislature is to what extent they are going to tell local jurisdictions they have to reduce the parking requirements in order to increase density. And that has again to do with the proximity to transit services. So a lot of the cities and the counties are rejecting that, and they're fighting against it. But in real life, it costs about $10,000 a year on average to own, operate, and maintain a car. And so a lot of people are needing transit who haven't needed it before because of our income inequality that's expanding. So thank you for that support, because I think that the more people get educated about what this really means, the better off we'll be.
And Cindy noticed that I'm adding that tonight is the league meeting, correct? No. Oh, it's your
Tonight.
Group.
Tonight is the affinity group meeting.
Okay.
And
30.
and tomorrow, I mean, Thursday night is our local league meeting where we've invited our planning directors.
Getting my dates confused.
Yes. So
she's put the link to register for the Bellingham to attend the Bellingham League meeting, and
it's a public education program that we're offering on Thursday. So we've invited the public and league members.
So going to have to stop.
It's 11 o'clock. So I'm going to
have another question for members of the group. Are you noticing in your own communities some changes in how housing is being provided? Like, are there tiny home communities where you live? I think there's something going on in Skagit Valley near Asian One. Isn't the apartment building across the street being turned into affordable housing. It wasn't an apartment building, it was an office building. If someone could update on that, or if you know of other things. Lisa, you have your hand up. So Cindy, if you need to stop recording at this
Well,
point, just continue for a minute or two.
Okay, sounds good.
Without you.
All right, bye.